Hello and welcome to this very special episode of The Big Interview. We are in conversation with Dr. David Frawley, a very prominent voice of Vedic culture, scriptures. He's read them more than what most Indians have in terms of knowing our history, and he is very passionately involved with the Hindutva philosophy as well. Dr. Frawley, thanks so much for speaking to us. As we talk today, there has been the Delhi election that has taken place, and it has been in the backdrop of Lord Hanuman and Hanuman Chalisa and all that coming into the frame. How do you analyze the Delhi election where so much was said in terms of religion being at the forefront of it?
Yes, Gaurie. Well, first, thank you for this interview. I'm very happy to be with you. I can't claim to be an expert on Delhi politics, but it's a complicated situation in many ways. And Delhi has always had its kind of special way of going its own direction, you might say. And also, you notice that elections are moving very quickly.
Yes.
Sentiments are moving very quickly. And even small differences in percentages can make big differences in votes. For example, in this election, Kejriwal gets 50%, BJP gets 40%, but Kejriwal gets almost 90% of the seats.
Yes.
So there are different things there. And there's polarization in the community. And we have a mixing of local issues like development locally, water, electricity, all the things the Aam Aadmi Party tried to do. And then you have some national issues. You have the CAA issue.
Yes.
You have a lot of migrant communities in Delhi.
Yes.
And you have a political manipulation of the election at various media and political levels. So what we had here was an interesting combination. On one hand, essentially all the anti-BJP parties have gone to AAP. And you can see that by their vote percentage. What did Congress get? 3 or 4%?
Yes.
So they essentially gave up and put all their votes.
Surrendered to the Aam Aadmi Party.
Yes. So if these other parties had done their normal canvassing to get their normal votes, then you would have had a split decision that might have even put the BJP into power.
How much? Yes.
Go ahead.
How much did the CAA impact this election? Because everybody or most political pundits said that the BJP just harped on the CAA issue and almost forgot about the others.
Well, first of all, the CAA has been a big national issue, and BJP in Delhi is only part of it. And BJP has been challenged nationally about the CAA issue.
Yes.
So it's become an issue in Delhi because of the timing, not because it's only happening in Delhi. So let's not blow that out of proportion. And there was also a pent-up frustration against the BJP because of their success on Ram Mandir and their success on the Kashmir issue. So a lot of the people who are protesting don't care about CAA. It's just a way of showing their displeasure for a party that has brought in the Ram Mandir, that has integrated Kashmir,
so
that did the
CAA
triple
is
talaq.
the pretext? Is that what you're saying?
It's a pretext, and that's why so few people even know what it is or what it says. And it's a very minor bill in some ways, but the support of minority religions in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, which is predominantly Hindus, but also others, is a minor issue. And all countries do it. America has a Lautenberg bill that gives precedence to Christian refugees coming to the United States, although it claims to be a secular country. So we have these concerns. Islamic countries always give precedence to Islamic groups and refugees overseas. So this was an old policy India had, and it was just simply being renewed because these people have no place to go.
Yes.
Muslim refugees, there's hundreds of Muslim countries. Hindu refugees, there's India, and maybe a little bit, maybe Nepal, who knows. But there's really not much for them. So why can't they have some precedence? And then you have to understand the hypocrisy. Muslims, you may have some issues in India, but they are a flourishing and growing community. Hindus in Pakistan have almost been exterminated. It's been a genocide.
Yes.
And yet nobody cares about them. And why shouldn't Muslims in India have sympathy towards Hindus in Pakistan? They want to have the same. Why the Hindus should also have the same rights.
Yes.
So there is an imbalance.
So do you
here.
think, sir, there is hypocrisy at many levels also about the Western media and the Western perception as far as CA is concerned? As you pointed it out, in America they have preference for Christians, but when a CA comes out, they have problems.
Well, first of all, the issues in America are from one side of the country only. It's mainly the Democratic Party that's allied with the far left, and it's mainly certain more pro-Islam and pro-Pakistan elements in America. It's not the country as a whole. Most people, the average American doesn't even know what CAA is. Many of them don't even know where Kashmir is located. And it's not a political issue for either party. Even the Democrats, who had the largest group opposing CAA, tried to have a forum, on Kashmir, tried to have a forum on Kashmir.
Yes, they did.
And even though they had a representative of Indian origin,
Yes, Pramila, yes.
she only got 29 people out of 435, and the whole thing went nowhere.
Yes.
So the Indian media is also highlighting these things more than what's actually going on in the West. No major country, as a matter of foreign policy, has criticized or come out against India on this issue, except Turkey, I think,
Yes.
and Pakistan, maybe Malaysia.
Yes.
Labour Party to some extent did, but not the ruling party in UK. And you can find publications, New York Times, economists that are criticizing India, but they don't represent all of the countries there. So let's put these things into perspective. The fact is that issue on Kashmir was so huge, the fallout was very minor
Yes.
against India. Remember, India also did its nuclear testing when everybody was against India. That blew over in a little while. So it's not the big issue that overseas that it is for people in India.
Okay. So then you're saying, sir, when you talk about the CAA, with the protests that are taking place here, it's not reflective in terms of a larger sentiment that the world sees when it comes to
Yes.
CAA? Is that what you're saying, sir?
Yes, in fact, again, most countries have bills like this, protecting certain types of refugees, whether by community or religion or ancestry. And the immigration and refugee issue is a big issue in different countries for various reasons, people crossing the borders. But there's no outrage against India on this, hardly at all. There's a little bit on the Rohingya issues relative to Myanmar.
Yes.
But that's also because there's so much money that is coming to the media from certain groups. So in America, people don't, this is not an issue for them.
Do you then see this entire protest escalating from here on? And I ask you this because you have a BJP which has lost the Delhi election
Yes.
on the CAA issue. So do you expect the opposition parties to now escalate this? Do you expect the Shaheen Bagh to get a fresh lease of life?
Let's go back 5 years. All these issues were then.
Okay.
There was the giving back of the awards. There was the claim that churches were being vandalized in Delhi. Whatever happened to that?
Yes.
After the election was over, then there was no issue of churches being vandalized. It was a fake.
Yes.
So these various strategies have been going on. And there's always been an attempt to kind of radicalize and get the Muslims to riot. It didn't succeed so much in the past. Now they're trying to do that, use them as their foot soldiers, as it were. So these kinds of protests will probably, there'll be an effort to keep them going at various levels, but they'll also wear out at a certain level, just as all the protests went on 5 years ago, 4 years ago.
So you think they're timed for the election? Is that what you're saying, sir?
Oh,
You're
absolutely.
timed for the election?
Didn't they all leave after the election was over?
The award wapsi, yes.
No, even this one, Shai, they're all leaving that place. They're not staying there.
Some of them are saying that we are going to continue with this till the time there is clarity from the government.
Okay, well then let them stay there. But you can see that there is these kind of ground level protests, and we also see more of these happening. You have the Yellow Vest in France doing extensive protests on economic issues. So this idea of protest, you had this wall, people camping out about Wall Street a few years ago, hundreds of people,
Yes.
then suddenly they're gone.
Yes.
So these kind of social protests do go on. And student protesting, I was in the 60s, we were all protesting the Vietnam War, all the rest of it. So these things will go on to some degree, but how serious do we take them? And how do we take them? For example, the JNU students were part of a Marxist-Leninist student union. So and their manifesto talks about revolution, change of government, socialism, all these things. So obviously they have a political agenda, and some of these events give their political agenda a place to come forth.
But do you think this entire perception that the government has taken a position against students, whether it is JNU, whether it is Jamia. Is that something that you feel,
No,
it's
not
larger
true at all,
and
because
a lot
it's
of
not
people
true at
say
all,
it is
because
ABVP, which is the BJP Student Union wing, and hence it is nothing but the Hindutva brigade, which is unleashing this tyranny on students.
It's just the opposite. It's at JNU, it's the Marxists blocking registration, preventing teachers from going to classes. I've been there several times, intimidating students. And they have a history, and they also have a philosophy of violence, revolution. Look at how many tens of millions of people, they still support Che Guevara, Mao, Stalin. These are their role models. What did these guys do? Now you have a Hindu students of ABVP. Of course they're going to stand up, but they're not out there trying to disrupt classes, prevent education. They want to go to school. And maybe at some level they might try to defend themselves, but they are not aggressive militant people. Their model is Swami Vivekananda, not Che Guevara. Look at the different samskaras that are coming in there if you're following a Swami Vivekananda or you're following a Stalin, and you have these people up on your walls. Even the communist government, even the Sitaram Yechury, they still follow. Stalin is still there. I was in Kerala, and in Kerala you can see pictures and of communist gatherings, political gatherings, with pictures of Marx, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, all these guys together, Che Guevara, as if they're still relevant.
Yes.
So obviously people following violent revolutionaries are going to be violent and intolerant, and they want to provoke violence and create problems with the police, because that is their way of becoming victims, of gaining support.
What about then Jamia? That is where everybody said that, Jamia was nothing but a clear crackdown on students that happened. And that's a perception that was built up. I read a lot of global media also.
Certain media groups are
global
putting out.
Global media, I read about it, which said...
that certain media groups are putting that out, but it's simply not true. There is certain disorder that the police has to respond to. But you see how these fake shootings and all these other things are going on. It was planned. These were planned protests. They were planned to disrupt. They were planned to block traffic. They were planned to encounter the police and to hopefully provoke the police or cause issues. And that's what student revolts do. The student revolts in the 60s, I was there, they did the same thing. We tried to provoke the police. That was part of the issue, shouting at them, screaming at them, throwing things at them. The student wants to do that. So it wasn't it wasn't a Gandhian protest. It was a Marxist communist protest or a jihadi protest.
Why do you call it jihadi, sir?
Because there were people there who were supporting Kashmir separatists, Afzal Guru, all this whole history of turning Burhan Wani, turning these guys into their heroes. We had leaders there who were supporting Jinnah. So obviously there is a jihadi element. And Jamia, of course, has some of that there.
So how come when the BJP raised these issues in the Delhi election, they got
well, first of all, I don't think that's a grade. I don't think that's a grade, because you could also say, how come the BJP won all of India a year, 6 months, 8 months ago? Because they had fairly similar issues. They were blamed of creating the polarization in UP and other places. And that's a whole country. Here we're talking about a very unusual city. For example, in the United States, Washington, D.C. is the most leftist city in the country, even though it is the capital. So I think that's been overblown, and there's an attempt to try to give it more political importance for people who have another agenda to push it forward.
Okay.
But you can get students to revolt at various levels in different countries for various reasons.
So do you think this was egged on by the opposition parties? Is that what you're saying?
It was obvious. They intentionally went there, they got involved. We have instances where the media people were telling the students what to say, where to go, how to react. It was quite a drama. It's been going on. The JNU protests have been going on for years. So they've all been engaged in that. And a certain desperation is there now after the Ram Mandir and Kashmir, because they've lost some of their major issues they thought they would never lose. So when somebody's desperate...
Who would not lose, sir?
The left, the far left, and even some of the jihadi elements, they never thought Ram Mandir would come up. They never thought Kashmir would be reintegrated into India.
Yes. Okay.
So obviously there are many vested interests who want to provoke the situation.
So by that logic, this provocation would continue?
There will be an effort to continue, but at the same time, strategies will change and people will change. I mean, again, protests aren't always going to work in the same way over and over again, because people see see through what they are. But protests can go on, and all over the world protests are coming up more for various reasons, and protests on different sides that can go up. But you have a democracy, so of course you have to vote, and then resolve issues at certain levels. But what's happened in terms of the elections is all the anti-BJP parties trying to get together. So they're coming together not with a positive agenda of their own, but stopping BJP, and sometimes just stopping them from being in power. For example, Shiv Sena joined hands with parties it's been dead set against because it wanted the money and the power.
What do you feel about Shiv Sena, sir? You know, they've been at the forefront of the Ram Mandir movement and the
I've known
Hindutva
Shiv
campaign.
Sena for more than 30 years.
Were you disappointed?
Well, I'll also say that this is something hard to document, but one of my teachers, Dr. Balavashta, wrote for Samna quite a bit, and he also put some of my articles in there 20, 30 years ago. But yes, it's disappointing, because when Ram Mandir comes up and when Kashmir is reintegrated, then Shiv Sena is allying itself with Sharad Pawar and Sonia Gandhi. So it doesn't, I'm not going to say I know and and who I'm opposed to is wrong, but it seemed quite strange that this has gone on. And hopefully there are other solutions. I don't want to cast a shadow on a group for what's happened at a certain point of time, but it does seem to be very different than the original vision of Shiv Sena.
Speaking of Ram Mandir now, the trust has been formed now. First of all, what do you think about the larger message that is being sent with the inclusion of a Dalit member? It's a very powerful message that's being sent. What do you think about it, sir?
Well, actually, the Dalits are very actively connected to BJP. They have a number of members and groups. They've also been very active with the scheduled caste, all of that. In fact, one writer has recently said that they're now more on their side. So this idea of BJP as a Brahmin party is totally wrong. In fact, you have more the Lutyens, kind of anglicized Brahmins, who would never be with the Dalit. So these forces are coming in. And you also have to understand that Ramayana is the most popular, famous book throughout Asia. It is one of the great books of the world, one of the few. And if you take just literary works, not just simply religious works, it's in the top 10 or even top 5, and certainly the oldest and most widely used, and having the greatest impact on art, literature, dance, names, philosophy. So Ayodhya should be a World Heritage Site for Ramayana culture, for the whole world.
Do you think that's going to happen now?
It is happening. Ramayana museums are coming up there. Tourists will go there because Ramayana is very well known throughout. We were in Bali recently, Ram, all of these things are there. So this must be honored. And it's sad that it's taken India this long to honor its most sacred city and its most sacred hero going back hundreds of or thousands of years. So it's very important that this blemish, you might say, has been removed. And how does a Ram temple in Ayodhya hurt anybody?
But people like Owaisi have still been saying that we don't accept 5 acre, we don't want an alternate site. What has been a mosque stays a mosque. So what do you think about people?
Well,
and
first
what do you
of all,
have to
he's
say to
totally wrong. If you go to Saudi Arabia, almost every mosque has been removed. Saudi doesn't believe in old mosques. So all the old shrines have been pretty much gone. So a mosque is not always a mosque. That is simply not the fact in Saudi and other countries. And if you have been by the same rule, then a church should always be a church. Why should Hagia Sophia now become a mosque? It was a church for so long. And the temple should be a temple. These holy sites have been there for thousands of years. Why should the mosque have precedent over all the other sites? Even if you look at Kashi Vishwanath, you can see that the mosque there was built from part of the temple.
So now do you think there will be a renewed focus on getting the other 2 temples also? A lot of people have spoken about it. Dr. Swami has already gone to court saying that whether it is the Gyanpith Mosque or the other one, there should now be a concerted effort to get them back as well. Do you think that will happen now?
There are certain historical issues. It's well known that Aurangzeb destroyed both these, Krishna Janmabhoomi, Kashi Vishwanath, in history. It's all known, it's all documented, it's all in the records. So that is a fact. There's no dispute as to
what I meant was, sir, is there going to be a renewed focus to get them back, or will the Ayodhya issue now address any latent such?
I think some of these issues will continue in the sense that they're very historical places. The whole history of India is connected to these places. And I think some issues will still come up. Obviously, there are, for example, when we were in Bulgaria a couple of years ago, when they left the Islamic rule of Turkey, they restored a lot of old churches. Under Islamic rule in Bulgaria, the churches had to be almost below ground. They couldn't be above. They couldn't have very much height to them. So they built many things, and some of the old mosques that had a church on them, they took down and replaced. That happened throughout Eastern Europe at that particular time.
Okay.
And some of these are political monuments, like British monuments you don't need to keep up in India. And some British monuments had chapels, all these other things. So let's put this into perspective. And it's not wrong.
But do you think there will now be another legal battle like we had for Ram Mandir in Ayodhya, for Kashi Vishwanath?
There needs to be a legal addressing of it. And this is where the Supreme Court will have to come in and make certain decisions. And this is where certain decisions have to be made on the basis also of sentiment. Because obviously, again, Kashi Vishwanath is not known to Islamic groups. It's not a major center for them. Hindus aren't asking for any site that was originally and always been a mosque. So I think there are a few places like that need to be addressed, Kashi Vishwanath, etc.
But there can always be an argument saying, sir, that folks will say that you're never going to address this issue of Hindu versus Muslim then, because you're going to keep raising this, and then it will mean that wounds will keep getting festered and they will never ever be resolved.
Pakistan took away so many temples. Nobody Muslims here are blaming Pakistan for doing that, taking away temples and turning them into mosques. So I think there has to be something reasonable, but obviously India has 4,000 years of Hindu temples. And not just the temples that were destroyed, there's temples that are ruined. There's a lot of history that needs to be honored, even getting the murtis back that are being taken away and stolen. There's a historical, artistic context as well as a religious, philosophical context. But things should be done with a certain care and discretion. And no one's asking to remove every possible mosque in India.
But what a lot of people are saying, or political pundits and even Islamic scholars are saying, that what is happening is that, quote unquote, the secular fabric of this country is getting destroyed. How do you respond to that, sir?
Well, first of all, India has never been secular, in the sense that secularism in the West was about the separation of church and state. There is no country in the West that takes money from temples and gives it to the government. Takes money from churches and gives it to the government. India is the only so-called secular country that takes the money from the majority religion, that regulates the practices of the majority of religion. Yes. No so-called secular country does that. So, and in India too, secularism gives special privileges to minority religions. America doesn't have that. All religions are more or less equal. If I was to get special tax benefits for opening a minority religion in America, in every other block there'd be a minority religion coming up for tax benefits. So secularism in India is a certain hypocrisy. And even, let's look at Mahatma Gandhi, who I have great reverence for on certain levels. I have some criticisms for on other levels. Is he a secular figure, a man in a loincloth? How many secular figures wear loincloths and have prayer meetings? So this idea of secularism in India is quite different. And also we have Hindus visiting dargahs, but we very rarely have Muslims visiting temples. So there is this idea that all religions are the same.
So you are saying secularism is a one-way street?
Yes, it's a one-way street in India, and also it is not, for example, I've been throughout India, the missionaries are everywhere trying to convert Hindus, and yet that's considered to be secular. See?
So you think there has to be more focus on addressing some of these issues?
Well, the
or
issues,
what would you want,
no,
sir?
there has to be a uniform civil code. If you're taking the money from temples, why aren't you taking the money from churches and mosques? The Constitution is for everybody. One religious community cannot be penalized. And democracy means majority rules. That means if you win the election, you rule. Now in India, it's said that if the majority rules, it's majoritarianism, so you should let the minority rule. Why have an election? Just let the minority rule. So that hypocrisy has gone on.
You would want temples to be taken out of the clutches of government rule?
And the government has no right to regulate what goes on in the temple. Okay. Religious authorities do that. Unless there's some, of course, criminal activity going on, or guns or whatever. So you have an
But
India.
that comes under state governments, sir.
no,
How are you going to then ensure state governments do it? Because state governments have also gone a step forward. They've hiked salaries of imams and so on and so forth. So how
They're
are you
also
going
giving money to imams and churches. That's not secular at all. No country does that. That's religious pandering. See?
Yes, yes, and that's happening in several states, including Delhi, where Kejriwal has also done it.
Yeah, of course. It's happening in almost all the states. I hate to say.
As we wrap this up, sir,
Yes.
one final question I want to ask you is that a lot of work has been done as far as Prime Minister Modi's tenure is concerned. What would be your wish list of the top one or two things that you would want Prime Minister Modi to now focus on a priority basis?
Well, first of all, since I'm not active on the ground and I don't have a track record, I want to speak with some caution, because when you're actually working on the ground with institutions, you see things differently. India has a very deep-seated bureaucracy. It has a very slow way of making changes. It has a lot of built-in inertia. Now, that being said, obviously there needs to be major changes in the educational sphere. I've seen the textbooks coming out of India, and I'm appalled. You wouldn't have these kind of textbooks coming out of other countries that are so negative about the tradition or the history. For example, the Greeks are proud of their ancient traditions.
Yes.
In India, there's a kind of an attempt to hide
Disdain.
the ancient traditions. And there's an honoring of people in the past. For example, if you go back 1,000 years, they're all going to be Hindus, they're all going to be involved with yoga, they're all going to be Buddhists, they're all going to be involved with these cultures. That's what was there. There'll be Sanskrit is there. You have to honor that. You can't say, well, it's because it's something people today in India might not want to see, that they weren't there. You still have to honor that particular past. And India, my point is India
But
is
in yoga, the Prime Minister has done a lot.
yeah, I know. But my point is India is a civilization. That civilization needs to be preserved. I'm not talking about just a political issue. So preserving India as a civilization, giving better education about India, but also preserving India's knowledge. What are people doing throughout the world? They're studying yoga, Vedanta, Ayurveda, these aspects of India. They're not studying Jinnah, they're not studying, even Mahatma Gandhi, they're studying to some degree.
Yes.
But they're more aligned with the forces of the Indian independence movement. They're not studying Nehru. In fact, they're wondering, why is it that Che Guevara that we've thrown out, you guys are still honoring him here 50, 70 years
After
later.
yes.
So my work as a Vedic educator is to promote the Vedic knowledge as its universal relevance and its value on so many levels, whether it's health, psychology, spirituality. And history does need to be written. India is the only country where the colonial narrative about its history is still being taught. Primitive,
time to
superstitious.
address
Yes, where that hasn't been changed. For example, in America, we were taught the Native Americans were all primitive savages. That narrative has been removed. They were essentially massacred by the so-called civilized white men. So the British also did genocide in India. Great famines orchestrated all of that. And then in the terms of the history, India does have a great past. Why haven't you been learned, like this Tanaji movie, why don't you learn about Shivaji? Why don't you learn about Rana Pratap or even some of these great dynasties of the past?
Yes.
Why are you all trapped in this idea of Nehru? In fact, the Indian independence movement, Nehru was only one of many, many figures there. And why are you letting Marxists write your history books? You have your own civilization. You don't need to import Marxists to tell you what India is. They're not going to know because they have a totally different mindset, different values.
Yes.
Look at what the Chinese Marxists did. They destroyed the history of China. They destroyed almost every temple there. Now they're trying to bring Confucianism back that they pushed on the other side. So don't have the people interpreting your culture, civilization, who have an ideological bias against it. And that is what has been done
All right,
in the Indian
Let's see whether
context.
the HRD ministry finally agrees and
Well,
pays
I hope
attention.
changes are made, but I
Yes.
also tell this is something you must recognize, that every child, every family, every community in India should also be teaching about the culture,
Absolutely.
the history.
Culture, history of India needs to be told to future generations. Absolutely.
And traditions preserved, the art, the music, the dance, the spirituality.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Frawley, for speaking to us. That, of course, was Dr. David Frawley on a whole host of issues, from abrogation of Article 370 to CAA, to protests, and, of course, the political opposition to Prime Minister Modi and the BJP, and the idea of Hindutva. Thanks very much for watching.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.